So really what I want to cover with you today is volunteer management cycle, so all the various different phases. But in meeting with Hockey Alberta, there were 3 portions of that cycle in particular that we were going to focus on today. So as you can see, it's volunteer recruitment, volunteer orientation and training, and volunteer retention. So my intent today and with my presentation isn't to tell you precisely, steps 1 through 10, this is how you're going to do your job. It's to share with you principles and best practices related to these different phases that you can then take and apply to your various models and associations. And so I know that there's a lot of other experts in the room who can answer questions if you have them specifically about your role. So we'll start with volunteer management and that cycle overview. So in many organizations, and be them big, small, and like I said, it really depends on the time frame. This is a representative volunteer management cycle. So you typically start with your needs analysis. So what do you need by way of numbers and positions? And then once you understand your need and have validated that need, you're going to move into recruitment. So we're going to talk about that one in a bit more detail. Once you've recruited your volunteers, you then need to screen them. And so I'm not going to talk specifically about screening today. There's different rules and guidelines in place for bringing volunteers on with every association, be that a background check, things like that. So that's unique to each organization, but those are guidelines that need to be established and then followed, particularly if your audience are children. So placement. So once you've screened your volunteers, it's about finding the right role for them, because that is going to directly impact engagement. Finding that right fit is really important. It's setting people up for success from the start. And so placement in this case are going to be that safety person role within the various associations, and you're recruiting those from each of the teams. So the role itself is very clear, what you're placing into, but again, trying to get that best fit is a good objective. Orientation and training. So now you've got everybody in their places. How do you orient them? And we'll talk more about what's the difference between orientation and training, but get them ready to perform their role. So again, you guys are here today getting training to perform your role. So how do you now cascade that to the next level? Resourcing and supervision. To me, that's really more about leadership, right? It's how do you now lead your volunteers and provide them the support and the guidance they need to do their role. Because there's a few things that, if we're talking about volunteer retention, will contribute to somebody walking away from a volunteer role or not showing up, or getting a bad reputation, and that's around not having someone who's providing them with some leadership and support when maybe there's some tougher situations that they need to handle. And recognition, that can take many different forms, but recognition is an important part of that volunteer management cycle. And what it all contributes to is kind of in this middle here, right? Retention isn't a standalone. Doing all of these things well contributes to retention, to keeping the volunteers that you recruit. The other thing I'll say is that with retention, those roles get a good reputation, right? So when you need to recruit someone new into a position, the person who's leaving is like, yeah, it was a really good experience, right? So doing these well helps this cycle to remain really healthy. Now, evaluation, in some cases, it is evaluation. I think of this stage more as feedback, and feedback is always 2 ways, right? So what feedback might you have for the volunteer? Everybody likes to develop, right? Likes to get feedback, but also being open to hearing feedback from that volunteer so that you can then tweak as you need the various different stages of the cycle. Any questions about just overall? Like I said, there are the 3 that we'll take a look at in more detail, but any immediate questions?